Joining us tonight, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. Great to have you with us, Tom. Security clearance defense attorney Sean Bigley. He wrote a terrific new Wall Street Journal op-ed arguing the deep state has weaponized the federal security clearance process in order to obstruct outright the Trump administration. Thank you both for being here. Let me start, Tom, with you and this the idea that we have to put up with a special counsel, a president who, I mean, this has become a super authority that now has more power than the president of the United States, not envisioned by the Constitution in any way, shape, or form. Why the hell should we put up with it?
Well, Lou, I think this just goes back to the fundamental problem with the special counsel, is that the very idea of a special counsel is you're going to take a prosecutor and put him or her outside the normal chain of command, outside the bureaucracy, as it were.
It's outside of government.
Well, it's certainly outside the ordinary chain of command. I think it's within the president's power to fire a special counsel, but it's not within the ordinary chain of command in the sense that the attorney general can dismiss a line prosecutor like that. You have to go through certain hoops to dismiss a special counsel.
You know, in all respect, I mean, I'm talking to two lawyers here tonight, so forgive me, but you're just a lawyer. I mean, we're talking about the Constitution of the United States. There is nothing in the Constitution that envisions putting a superpower over the President of the United States or in any way disturbing the balance of power among three co-equal branches of government.
Well, Lou, I agree with you that if the special counsel were, in fact, above the President of the United States, you have a fundamental constitutional problem.
He has the power to subpoena a President of the United States. He has the power to bring charges against the President. Are you kidding me? That's a joke.
I'm not kidding. If the president still has the removal power and the power to terminate the special counsel, I don't think you can say the special counsel is above the president if the president, at the end of the day, has the power to remove the special counsel.
So what should this president do?
Well, in my view, Lou, I think that this president needs to do whatever he can to bring this investigation to an end.
No. Wait. No. Come on. And I want to turn to you, Sean. Thanks for being patient with me. The other part, you know, this president is under no obligation, in my opinion, for any more games. The American people's will is being thwarted. The president of the United States is running a superpower. He is engaged in foreign policy across the entire globe. He is driving a almost $20 trillion economy, and he's got to put up with a bunch of left-wing acolytes trailing around Bob Mueller. Are you kidding me?
My point is that I think if the president were to give Mueller an hour or two of his time and answer limited questions, we bring this to an end faster. I don't want to see 6 months or a year of litigation, Lou, over a subpoena power. I don't think the president wants that. The country doesn't want it.
I don't think the American people want it either. I think they've
Absolutely
had a belly
not.
full.
Let's
Sean,
bring this thing to an end.
Let me turn to you real quickly on the security clearances. Your piece on, is it Adam Lovinger? Is that the way to say his name correctly?
Correct.
So, you know, I mean, is extraordinary. How many people are caught in the web of the deep state and the obstructionism throughout, as Tom pointed out, the bureaucracy here that has decided it is going to resist the Trump administration?
Absolutely, Lou. I mean, you put your finger right on it, frankly. I mean, this case, the Lovinger case, is symptomatic of a far, far larger problem, and that is the weaponization of security clearances against Trump appointees in a bid to keep them out and keep out people who will execute the president's agenda. So what we're seeing in the Lovinger case right now is precisely that. And I have to tell you, I mean, had someone come to me a year ago and said this is what we would be dealing with now, I really would have thought of it as a conspiracy theory. But what we have seen take place over the last 18 months in the federal bureaucracy has been nothing short of a wholesale repudiation of the election and an effort by entrenched bureaucrats to overturn it.
It's stunning. And how many people come up for security clearances? I think the number was something like 80,000 people in the course of a year. I mean, that is immense power, and the bureaucracy can simply suspend Adam Lovinger. In this case, he's been suspended administrative leave without having any opportunity to defend himself. This is outrageous. It's hard to believe we're talking about the U.S. government here.
He has been frozen out for a full year now from his responsibilities, and truly, this is, as I said, symptomatic of a much larger problem. I mean, if you take a look at even Ronnie Jackson, for example, right. You have, in essence, folks on the Hill, folks in the bureaucracy who have just decided, you know what, we're gonna throw things at the wall, we're gonna see what sticks, and there's no effort to verify anything prior to levying the charges. There's no effort to engage in what we in the rest of the world would view as fundamental due process. That all comes after the allegations have been levied, after somebody's reputation has been destroyed. And I'll tell you this, Lou, I am very pleased to announce for the first time tonight on your show that we have been informed as of today that Mr. Lovinger's case is now being criminally investigated by the Inspector General's office at the Defense Department with respect to the allegations that he's levied about contracting, corruption, cronyism, all the stuff that was taking place that, frankly, Pentagon leadership didn't want to hear about, and that's why his clearance was suspended. So we're in a very different ballpark today than we were just yesterday, and it's about time.
And the Inspector General standing up. That is welcome news, and we wish you and Mr. Lovinger and all of the people you are defending and who should stand up against this deep state in the insidious, toxic structure that they've created in our federal government. I want to ask you both as we wrap up here. And I want to, what is your best judgment, Tom, about the solution? Because there is something very clear here. Our legal system is now corrupt. It's not just simply the leadership of the FBI, the Department of Justice. We have a corrupt judiciary as well. People don't want to acknowledge that. But this is without question a country right now that has, I don't know, people talk about 2 levels of justice. My God, it looks to me like far more than that. And it looks to me like the capacity to turn aside the will of the people in a legitimate election is risking the entire republic. Your thoughts, Tom?
Yeah, a few thoughts, Lou. The first is I agree 100% that so much of policy is driven by personnel. And when you have a new administration come in and actors, either the opposition party in the Senate or people deep within the bureaucracy who hold power over security clearances and the like, prevent a new president from putting his people into the government, that affects policy because you can't make the change if you don't have the folks you need in the government. As far as the broader picture, my sense is that we have gone very far down the road, and we certainly saw a lot of this during the Obama administration, where people would essentially criminalize policy differences, that elections have consequences, people vote certain parties for a reason, and just because someone differs with you or has a different policy view with you doesn't mean that they are a criminal actor. I think we saw a lot of abuses in the last few years along these lines, and hopefully we as a country can start recognizing that just because someone has a different political view doesn't mean they violated the law.
You know, that's a very warm and fuzzy thought, and I salute you for it.
Well, I appreciate that.
I think the SOBs need to go to jail. Because they are working against the interest of this nation. They are defying our standards, our laws, and they are corrupt in every possible way. I'm sorry to offer that as counterpoint to that warm moment that you've given us, Tom. Sean, your thoughts in the solution?
Yeah, I thought everything that Tom said was right on the money. I will just add, I would like to see some members of Congress stand up and have a spine and do something about this. In the Lovinger case, for example, I'd love to see a courageous member of the Senate put a hold on all DOD nominations until this case is resolved. There are tools here that are available to the legislative branch, and they're not effectively being exercised. And I hear a lot of congressmen complain that their primary frustration is the inability to get anything out of the bureaucracy. But there are tools here available, and they're not being effectively used. So I'd really like to see Congress step up and start holding hearings,
Again,
start
we're back
using
to
their
Congress
tools that they have
and them
available.
finding a spine and some principle.